Hello Theory 2 students. As promised, I am giving you a lecture to view off of YouTube. Today is Friday afternoon, Good Friday, April 10th, and we're going to review for your second theory test, which, by the way, I should mention, is going to be a Wednesday, April 15th. I will be making it available to you between noon and midnight that Wednesday afternoon. And so I'm going to, obviously we have an Easter break on Monday, April 13th, so don't want to have a test on that day, of course. So it will be Wednesday, April 15th, between noon and midnight. And I will have that all posted and ready to go for you on Canvas by that time. So the majority of this lecture is going to be going over the Test 2 review sheet that I provided for you earlier this week. So if you don't have that with you right now, please get it out and have it in front of you, and that will make this review all the more meaningful and vivid to you. I think what I'll do is I'll just take most of the review in order. I may skip around, I may not, I don't know yet. But we're going to start with the first section on the first page of the review and go over the responses, go over the answers. And hopefully, by the end of this lecture, you will have all the information you need to prepare and get ready for the test on Wednesday. Again, if something is a little fuzzy to you, or if you need to hear something again, or if I'm going too fast, please stop this video, pause the video, go back, re-look at these sections of the review as many times as you need in order to be prepared for the test. So, for the first section of the test review, I believe I covered this in some detail at the end of my last lecture, so I don't feel the need to discuss it at great length right now. Let me go ahead and put up the answers that I have to this section of the test, and you can go ahead and check your answers with what I have. Now, my answers are written on a edition, or I suppose a older version of the Test 2 review, so it might look a little different than exactly what your Test 2 review looks like, but the problems that I am showing here should be the same. Just so that you can see if you can't read it really from your vantage point, the first problem, the key should be C minor. Then F sharp minor for the next measure, A flat major, and finally, the key was given to you there for E minor for the last one. Now, your harmonies, your chords that you spell in the staff here do not have to be exactly like mine. However, they do need to be almost as close as possible to mine, as you can get. So the only difference I think between my chords and your chords is that you could have notated your answers in a different octave than mine, but otherwise the notes and the accidentals should be the same. So the first one, reading from the bottom up, I have F, A flat, C, and D. F must be on the bottom, to be in the correct inversion, first inversion. All right, the next measure you'll need to have, again, on the bottom, I have D, then E sharp, a G sharp, and B, and D must be on the bottom for the third inversion. The next measure, a root position 2-7 in the key of A flat major. You should have from the bottom up B flat, D flat, F, and A flat. And finally, on the last problem, we're going for a major minor 7th chord in the key of E minor. And remember that this chord, the 5 chord in minor keys, always requires you to raise the leading tone, the 7th degree of the scale, with an accidental. So from the bottom up here I have F sharp, A, B, and D sharp. F sharp must be on the bottom for the correct inversion. And also, any leading tone 7th chord in a minor key is going to need the leading tone, which is the root of these chords, raised with an accidental. Remember, the diminished 7/7 chords are built on the leading tone of the key, T of the key. The capital 7 chord, which we'll get to in a little bit later on down this review, the capital 7 chord is built on the subtonic, or the lowered 7th scale degree, or Te. And Te never requires an accidental in a minor key. Only T, the leading tone, does. Before I move on to the second section of the review, I'd like to go ahead and list the chords that we have been focusing on this unit since before spring break. It doesn't hurt to list them here once again, based on, according to whether or not they belong in the major key or a minor key. So here are the chords that we have been dealing with this unit that belong correctly in major keys. We recall that the 2/7 chord is minor minor in major keys. We should recall that the 3 triad is a minor triad in major keys. The 7 triad is diminished in major keys, and diminished triads we always use in first inversion. And finally, the 7/7 chord in major keys is half diminished. Half diminished. And 7/7 chords can be used in any inversion. It's just the 7 triad that we restrict ourselves to using in first inversion only. With respect to minor keys, the 2/7 chord is always half diminished 2/7 in minor keys. The 3 chord, the 3 triad I should say, is a major triad in minor keys. The 7 triad in minor keys may be diminished in harmonic minor, and the root of this chord is again always T, or the leading tone. But in natural minor, this is where we get the major 7 triad. And the root of this chord is always Te, or the subtonic, or the lowered 7th scale degree. So in minor keys, the 7 triad can be of 2 types, either diminished or major triad. And then finally, the 7/7 in minor keys turns out to be fully diminished 7/7. So if you do not know this, please study this. It would be helpful for you to memorize this information, because there may be questions on the test where you're given a triad or some kind of chord, and based on the quality or the type of triad, you have to identify whether or not you're in a major key or a minor key. So back to the test review. The second section of the test review involves taking some leading tone seventh chords, whether or not they're fully diminished or half diminished, and part writing them to what they're supposed to resolve to. Okay. Now, for the most part, any leading tone seventh chord, a 7/7, is going to go to tonic, either in root position or first inversion, and even in one case in second inversion. There's only one inversion of the 7/7 that can go to a dominant, a 5/7 chord. So let's look at the part writing first, talk about that briefly, and then we'll look at the chart that tells us what all the inversions of the 7/7 chord must move to. So in the first example on your review sheet in D major, we have a root position 7 half diminished 7, and those notes are C sharp, E, G, and B. Now, we should know that looking at your chart from prior classes, that a root position 7/7 goes to root position 1. And since I'm in a major key, my 1 should be uppercase or capital. Now, of the utmost importance, whenever you part write a 7/7 chord, you must realize and be aware of that the chord has two tendency tones. Two tendency tones. One of the tendency tones will be the leading tone of the key, what I call T of the key, and wherever that pitch is, even if it's in an inner voice, that tends to go up by half step. It's supposed to move up by half step to do. You can see that is happening here in the bass voice of this example. T goes up a half step, C sharp goes up a half step to do, which is D in this key. The other tendency tone with these 7/7 chords is always the 7th member of the chord. That is the chord 7th. It is not the 7th degree of the key or scale, it is the 7th of the chord itself. And in whatever voice you find that tendency tone, here it happens to be in the tenor voice. The B is the 7th of this chord. Wherever you find that chord 7th, you need to move it down by step. Down by step. And that moving that down by step will get you a note that belongs in the resolution chord you're trying to spell. Okay? So this is opposite tendencies, opposite directions these two tendency tones move. The leading tone or T of the key, the 7th scale degree, goes up by half step. The 7th of the chord goes down by step. It can go down by half step or whole step, it doesn't matter. But the 7th of the chord, in whatever voice it's found, must go down by step. So, the final answer for the part rating of this first example in section 2 of your review sheet, you should get D in the bass. You should get A in the tenor. And then to fill out the rest of the chord with good doubling, you should have F sharp in the alto and then D in the soprano. The very next example, again, I don't need to explain too much about the tendency tones. I'll just point them out to you in this particular example. We're in F major with a 7 half diminished 7. Technically, it's in third inversion. It's 7 half diminished 4/2. And the chord is E, G, B flat, and D is on the bottom. Okay. Leading tone of the scale or key of F is the note E. So wherever E is, and it turns out to be in the alto voice, when I take this to a 1-6-4, the E goes up by half step to F. The other tendency tone is the seventh of the chord, and in this case it is D. The D goes down by step to C, and therefore we have taken our two tendency tones, we've taken care of them. Alright, looking at what you need to fill out the tonic 6-4 chord, remember any triad in second inversion, we double the bass note, and there are no exceptions to that rule. So I need another C in the chord, and I put the C in the tenor because it's right near the B flat that I was coming from in the tenor. And the only other pitch I need is an A, and I got that from the soprano, which was on G, and it just moved up a step to A. So my final answer is 1-6-4 in the key of F, which is spelled C, C, F, and A. Now if you decided to, because you have an alternative resolution chord here, if you decided to resolve 7 half diminished 4-2 to 5-7, well then the only tendency tone you're going to be able to move is the seventh of the chord, and that will still go down by step to C in the bass. The other tendency tone of the initial chord here, the E natural, it is not going to be able to go up by half step at all because it turns out to be a common or shared tone with a pitch in the 5-7 chord. So if you resolve this 7 diminished, half diminished 4-2 to 5-7, just kind of ignore or block out my 1-6-4, and your part rating would go from this first chord to the last chord that I have in the measure directly. You would be able to keep the G as a common tone, keep it static. The E would be kept as a common tone, stationary or static, and the B flat would be kept static or stationary. That's if you took this first chord directly to a 5-7 rather than to the 1-6-4. Completing the two examples in this section of the review, we have gone to minor keys at this point. The third measure of this section is in G minor, and you should have a fully diminished 7-7. Indeed we do. It happens to be in first inversion. And again, from the chart, which I'll review in just a few moments here, you should know that 7-6-5 must go to a first inversion tonic, not a root position tonic. The reason it must go to a first inversion tonic is because if it did not, if you took it to a root position tonic, you would either get parallel fifths or poor unequal fifths involving the bass and another voice. So it must go to first inversion 1. Finding our two tendency tones is the first thing before we as we part write this. Again, here's one of the tendency tones. It's the leading tone of the scalar key, F sharp, and that goes up by half step, in this case to G, which is Do. The other tendency tone of this chord is the chord's seventh. If F sharp is the root, A is the third, C is the fifth of the chord, therefore E flat is the chord's seventh, and as such it needs to be moved down by step. So my final answer for this 1-6 chord, from the bottom up I have B flat in the bass, G in the tenor, D in the alto, and D in the soprano. The reason I have the D doubled is because 1-6 chords, I prefer not to double the bass. In fact, you should try not to double the bass in 1-6 chords. So I didn't double the B flat in the bass, I doubled another pitch, that is, I doubled the D. And if any of you are wondering about, well, did I write parallel fifths between the tenor voice and the soprano voice in this example, I would say close, but no, I did not. F sharp to C is a diminished fifth, G to D is a perfect fifth. So the fifths between the tenor and the soprano voice in this measure, they are called unequal fifths. Technically, they are not parallel perfect fifths. Going to the last example in this section, E minor is the key. I have a 7 fully diminished 4-3, and 7-4-3 needs to go again to a first inversion tonic. That's why I have 1-6 here. The two tendency tones of my leading tone 7th chord. First of all, T of the key is D sharp. There's the D sharp in the alto. So T of the key always goes up by half step to Do, so I took it up to an E. The other tendency tone in this first chord is a C. That is the 7th of the chord because it's a D sharp, F sharp, A, C. C is the chord's 7th. As the 7th of the chord, the C needs to move down by step, so I moved it down to B. And the final answer for my 1-6 chord is G in the bass, B in the tenor, and I have E being shared between the alto and the soprano voice because I do not want to double the G in the bass. I want to double another pitch. So I decided to double the root of this chord, which is not in the bass. The next thing I'd like to discuss is I'd like to review the three types of 6/4 chords or second inversion triads that we dealt with this unit. Okay, first of all, you need to know the names of the types of the three second inversion triads that we use in music. Okay. The full name for these types of 6/4 chords, one of them is known as the cadential 6/4. Another one is known as the passing 6/4. And the third and last one is known as the neighbor 6/4 chord. Cadential, passing, and neighbor 6/4 chords. The abbreviations, the analysis symbols that we use for these three types of 6/4 chords are as follows. The cadential 6/4, we do not use a letter. We use the Roman numeral for this one. Either if you're in a major key, it's 1/6/4 or lowercase 1/6/4. This is the only second inversion triad type that we do analyze still with a Roman numeral. The passing 6/4 chord, whether or not the triad in second inversion is major or minor, does not matter. The abbreviation is capital P6/4 to indicate its passing function. And finally, the neighbor 6/4 chord, again, it doesn't matter if the triad in the music is major or minor. The abbreviation we use to analyze this type of second inversion triad is always capital N6/4. The last piece of important information about these three 6/4 chord types is the question of what do you double? Well, there is no exception to the rule, but for all of the 6/4 chord types, we double the bass. And again, it's easy to remember because it's the same for all three types and there are no exceptions. Double the bass note when you part write any of these three types of 6/4 chords. So with that information about second inversion triads now reviewed and covered, let's take a look at some of the part rating examples that you had on your test review that involved these types of chords. Notice that the first example here contains a cadential 6/4. Therefore it is labeled with the Roman numeral 1/6/4. We are in a minor key, so it's lowercase 1. And basically I had asked you to part write the 1/6/4 to a 5/7, and then part write the 5/7 chord to a root position 1. And the instructions told you to make sure that your final tonic chord is complete. That is, it has a root, a third, and a fifth. None of the members of that chord are missing. So a couple things to be aware about as we review this example. Notice that the bass of the 1/6/4 chord is doubled. You see a B is in the bass of this EGB chord, and the B is doubled. We have it sounding once also in the tenor in addition to the bass. Okay. As we part write to 5 or 5/7, usually what we do is we take the two notes that are doubled, we keep them static in the same voice because the same doubling will be used in the next chord, the 5 chord. Well, we don't have just a 5 triad here, we have a 5/7. So the bass is going to remain static or stationary for the root of this 5/7 chord. But in this case, the tenor is going to have to slide down a step to produce the 7th of my 5/7 chord. Whether it's a 5 triad or 5/7, the upper two voices that create a 4th above the bass and a 6th above the bass, and in this case those are the alto and the soprano respectively, those will always move down by step to fill out the notes that we need for the 5/7 chord. Okay. Now, I used a complete 5/7 chord here, and I need to finish off with a complete tonic chord here. What I was able to do then, this chord, remember, has two tendency tones. The leading tone of the key, T of the key, turns out to be in an inner voice. That's right here with this D sharp. And by the way, please do not forget to raise the leading tone in this chord in a minor key with an accidental. You need to have a sharp on your D. Anyway, since this leading tone appears in an inner voice, I do not have to take it up by half step to do. I have the choice, the option, to frustrate it. And so that's exactly what I did. I frustrated T in an inner voice down, and when you do that, it leaps down a small leap of a third. I took it down to the B, and that way I am ensured to have a complete tonic chord when I finish. Okay. So I frustrated T in an inner voice down to B. The other tendency tone of this chord is the 7th of the chord. B, D sharp, F sharp, A. A is the chord 7th. It must go down by step. If you forget to do that on the test, you will be missing lots of points. So please lodge it in your brain and make sure that you remember to take care of the tendency tones first. Therefore, my final complete tonic chord from the bottom up is E, G, B, and E. The next example asks you to include a neighbor 6/4 chord in the progression and part write it. Hopefully we are familiar by now that whatever chord comes before a neighbor 6/4, the exact same chord in the exact same bass position should also occur right after the neighbor 6/4 chord. So notice here we have a 5 to begin with and a 5 in root position to end with also. The reason that this is true is because the bass line of a neighbor 6/4 remains static or stationary. Again, you might think that is a little bit confusing because a neighbor 6/4 chord you expect neighbor motion. Well, we do get neighbor motion with this chord, we just do not get it in the bass voice. The neighbor motion with a neighbor 6/4 chord always occurs in two of the upper voices. In this case, I have the neighbor motion occurring in the alto and the soprano. the C sharp and the E of the first chord move up by step to D and F sharp, and then they produce a triad in second inversion while those notes are sounding. Then those notes come back down to where they were, down by step to C sharp and E once again, producing the notes I need for a 5 chord in the key of D major. Because the bass note is supposed to be doubled in root position 5 chords and also in all second inversion triads, I used the bass and the tenor. Both could remain static or stationary because they are doubled in every single chord of this example. Just moving 2 of the notes in the upper voices here creates a triad in second inversion, and after that they move back down to where they started, which gives us the same chord that we started with. And this is the neighbor motion, moving up by step and then down by step. The final example on the review that includes a second inversion triad is this one here in C minor that asks you to include and part write a passing 6/4 chord. Once again, the easiest way, the best way for me to remember how to use a passing 6/4 chord is if you start with a triad in first inversion, then go to the same triad in root position. The reverse also works. If you started with a triad in root position, take the passing 6/4 and use it to get to the same triad but in first inversion. Passing 6/4 chords are very helpful and they work very well going from a triad in first inversion to root position, or the reverse, root position to first inversion. Now, passing 6/4 chords can sometimes go to completely different triads, which I'll talk about in a moment, but this is, I think, the easiest way to do it. And in the key of C minor, I started with a 4 chord in first inversion. A passing 6/4 chord always needs 3 note stepwise motion in the bass. 3 note stepwise motion in the bass. So if I'm going to go from a first inversion 4 to a root position 4, I need to go from A flat down to F, and the G fits right in between. Here's my 3 note stepwise motion, A flat, G, F. Now the G happens to be the bass note then of a triad in second inversion. Well, what triad would it be in second inversion? Well, we don't need to know the Roman numeral because we always analyze it as a passing 6/4. But if G is the 5th of the chord, right, when the 5th of the chord is in the bass, the triad is in second inversion. If G is the 5th of the chord, then I'm trying to spell a C-E-G chord. C would be the root. Okay, I need to know that in order to get the notes that I need for the part writing. Alright, so coming from this first chord, I know I need to double the bass. So if G is in the bass, I need another G, and I actually put mine in the soprano voice. But I know I'm also spelling a C-E-G triad. So that means I need a C and I need an E. And I place my C in the tenor and the E in the alto. And then spelling a root position 4 chord in this key, it's F, A flat, C. The F, which is in the bass, is doubled because it's a root position triad. There's my other F in the alto. I need a C, which I have in the tenor, and I need an A, which turns out to be in the soprano. Now, one other thing that you normally get when you part write of going into a passing 6/4 and coming out of a passing 6/4, all the chords surrounding it in context, you typically get a voice exchange. And I don't know if you can see from your vantage point very clearly, but I do have a voice exchange in my example. The voice exchange occurs between the bass voice and the soprano voice. Notice the bass voice goes A flat, G, F, and the soprano voice does the reverse motion. F, G, A flat. So the voice exchange can be seen by A flat in the first chord going to F in the last chord in the bass, whereas just the reverse is true in the soprano. F in the first chord going to A flat in the last chord. Next I'm going to skip in your test review up to section 7. That's because I was going to go over this chart right after we part wrote the 7/7 chords in section 2, and then it slipped my mind, but now I've remembered it, so let's come to this section. You should really have this chart memorized for the test. Know how to fill in all of the chords in these blanks, which are resolution chords to any of these chords off to the left. Okay. I used, in my chart, I assumed a minor key, so I have all my chords listed correctly for minor keys. The reason I did that is because these 7/7 chords are fully diminished, but I'm not going to be too picky if you use major chords or chords for major keys or chords for minor keys for your chart on the test, just as long as you have the right Roman numerals in the right inversions. So once again, from the top, root position 5/7 can either go to root position 1 or root position 6. Those are the only two options. A 5/6/5 and a 7 diminished 7 both go to root position 1. Both go to root position 1. And this is all, again, this chart comes from the placement and the location of what voices the tendency tones of these chords off to the left here. What voices the tendency tones are located in. A 5/4/3 can go to either 1 or 1/6, but a 7 diminished 6/5, which will have the same bass note as the 5/4/3, because of the potential for parallel fifths or poor unequal fifths with the bass, the 7 diminished 6/5 must go to 1/6. And that's why I have added an arrow for the 7 diminished 6/5, that it cannot go to root position 1, only to 1/6. The 5/4/2 and the 7/4/3 go to the same, move to the same chord, and that is a tonic triad in first inversion, 1/6. Finally, the 7 diminished 4/2, the third inversion of that 7/7 chord, can move either to 1/6/4, that is cadential 6/4, or 5/7 in root position. Again, if you need to pause the video, if you need to stop it, rewind it, back up, and look at this again, and just let this information sink in, really for any of the sections of this test review, I encourage you to do that. The next part of the review that I'd like to discuss, section 4, is all deals with transposition. So let's just review some basic information, some important, very fundamental information about transposition, and then we'll look at the answers for this section of the review. On the board here, I have the relationship for most all of the transposing instruments that you need to know, the relationship between what we see notated, or the written pitch, versus the actual sound that we hear, or what we call the sounding pitch, or concert pitch. For 6 out of the 7 transposing instruments I've asked you to learn the transposing information for 6 out of the 7, this is the relationship. The written pitch is always above or higher than the actual sound that comes out of the instrument. Okay. Now, those instruments that transpose in this way, or that use this relationship with the notated pitch always higher than the sounding pitch, are these are those 6 instruments. We have the clarinet in B flat. We have the clarinet in A. We have the English horn. We have the French horn. We have the alto saxophone in E flat. And we have the trumpet in B flat. For those 6 instruments I just mentioned, their actual sound is always going to be lower than or below their notated or written pitch. Now, what are the intervals of transposition for those 6 instruments? Well, for the clarinet in B flat, it sounds a whole step or a major second below its written pitch. For the clarinet in A, it sounds a minor third below its written pitch. The English horn sounds a perfect fifth lower than its written pitch, and the French horn likewise sounds a perfect fifth lower than its notated pitch. The alto saxophone in E flat will sound a major sixth lower than its written pitch. And finally, the trumpet in B flat will sound a major second below its written pitch. The only instrument, transposing instrument, I wanted you to be responsible for that has this relationship reversed is the trumpet in D. For the trumpet in D, the sounding pitch is actually going to be higher than the written pitch. So for instance, if I were to draw another circle to show you the relationship between the sounding pitch and the written pitch with the trumpet in D, basically my diagram would look like this. And again, this is the only transposing instrument that you should be responsible for to know this. And so what we have here is we have the sounding pitch up on the top, and we have the written pitch down below. And this is only for the trumpet in D. Okay? So one way to remember the relationship between sounding and written pitch with the trumpet in D, it's just the opposite or the reverse of all of the other 6 transposing instruments we just looked at. Okay? And what is the interval of transposition for the trumpet in D? Well, the trumpet in D actually always sounds a major second, I guess I could put that right there, or a whole step above its written pitch. And that's the trumpet in D. Okay, so with those definitions, let's go back to this diagram and we'll deal with hopefully the majority of the transposing instruments we've discussed. Those 6 ones whose written pitch is always above its sounding pitch. And let's go to the test review applying this information. Just doing a teeny bit of skipping here. This is actually section 4B of the review. I'm skipping section 4A for the moment. In this section, you can see the directions tell us that we are given a transposed score. In fact, we are given correctly notated transposed pitches and key signatures for all of these transposing instruments. What we need to do is we need to create a piano version by finding out what the actual key and the actual sound for these 4 instruments is going to be. And then we're going to just write that over here for the piano. And remember that piano has nothing to do with transposition. There is no transposition involved. Anytime you have something for the piano, it is actual sound. It is actual sound. Okay? So we're supposed to include the proper key signature and the proper notes, and it says if the chord here is transposed correctly over here, we should get a type of 7th chord. Alright, well we just talked about how the English horn the actual sound of the English horn is a perfect fifth down or a perfect fifth lower than its written pitch. Okay. That is also true of the English horn's key signature. So if the English horn is notated in the transposed key of, let's say, E major with 4 sharps, what key is a perfect fifth below E major? You should come up with the key of A major. A major is the concert key, the actual sounding key that we're going to use for the piano. Okay. So A major has 3 sharps in its key signature. So I would put 3 sharps in the key signature for A major here, and also for here, because the concert key or the actual sounding key is the same for every instrument. Once you translate all of the transposed keys and notes to actual sound, everyone is unison and working on the same page in the same key. Alright, so the note that we need to include for the English horn over here in the piano part is going to be a perfect fifth lower, so we're going to write a G sharp. And you actually don't need a sharp on the G here because it will be in the key signature. The clarinet in A sounds a minor third lower than written. So if the transposed key for the clarinet in A is C major, no flats, no sharps, go down a minor third, and again, you should get the key of A. A is a minor third below C. And we're in a major key, so A major, once again, that matches with what we came up with before, so we're fine. And a minor third lower than the notated pitch G is an E. So you would notate an E here. The horn in F is going to be just like the English horn. It's actually sounding a perfect fifth lower than written. So A major is the key, and a perfect fifth lower than an E is an A. So I would put an A on this staff here. Finally, the trumpet in D is the one that does the opposite of all the others. Okay. It actually sounds a major second higher than written. So if it's notated here in the key of G major, what key is a major second higher than G? Well, that's A major. That's just what we're working in here for actual sound. So A major is the sounding key, and a whole step or a major second above this notated B is C sharp, which is going to go here, and you do not have to put a sharp on that because it's taken care of by the key signature. So when all is said and done, your final answer should look something like this. I did not have room in my older version of the test review for the key signature, but I did provide that space for you. Your chord should be A, C sharp, E, and then G sharp. And the type of 7th chord that that actual sound is a major 7th chord. A, C sharp, E, G sharp. Now, we just reviewed how to go from transposed written pitches to get actual sound. What we need to do now is the reverse. What happens if we know or are given actual sound and we need to know how to write, or we need to find out what notes to write for the transposing instrument? In that case, we actually go do the opposite of this diagram. Whereas before, we were actually going this direction from top to bottom, for the 6 of the 7 transposing instruments to go, if we have sounding pitch information first and we need to find written pitch information, we're starting here, we just need to go the opposite direction. We need to go up. Okay? So let's take that information and apply it to section 4A of the test review. Alright, so here we have section 4A, we're given a piano score. We're given music written for the piano. And from that, we're supposed to notate these two voices. For B-flat clarinet is one of them, and E-flat alto saxophone correctly. Include the proper key signatures and notes for the transposing instruments. Okay? So, the question becomes, what do we know? What information do we already have? Do we have written pitch, or do we have actual sound? And the answer in this example is we actually are given actual sound. Because remember, stuff for piano has nothing to do with transposition. It's always actual sound. Okay. So if we're given actual sound and actual keys, what we need to do is we need to be able to then to write the right notes and the right key signature for these transposing instruments. And since our two transposing instruments are B-flat clarinet and E-flat alto saxophone, we're using the diagram that I just showed you a moment ago, where the actual sound is down on the bottom, and the written pitch is always going to be above the actual sound. Alright, so let's assume I'm looking at the key signature. It doesn't matter if you think of this measure here for piano as in F major or D minor. Your calculation should still give you the right key signature over here when you notate it. But let's just assume this chord and this measure is in D minor. Okay? And we have to write the key signature for B-flat clarinet. What key, by the way, what is the interval of transposition for B-flat clarinet? It is a major second, and we're going to be going up a major second. From actual sound, go up a major second, and we'll get the right key and the right transposed notated pitches. Okay. So, what key is a major second above D minor? The answer is E minor. So I'm going to write the key signature for E minor in this space. What is the key signature for E minor? It is 1 sharp, F sharp. All these notes in the top staff need to be transposed up a whole step or a major second and written then on this staff. So E up a major second is F sharp, and again your key signature will take care of the sharp on the F. C sharp up a whole step is D sharp, so you're going to have an accidental on the D for D sharp. B up a whole step is, pay attention to the key signature. This is a sounding B flat. B flat up a whole step is C natural, and then G up a whole step is A. And last but not least, the E flat alto saxophone, we're going to go up. And the interval of transposition is a major sixth up to get the right key and notation. So once again, if the sounding key is D minor, what key is a major sixth above D minor? Well, okay, a major sixth above D should be B, right? B natural. So that means the key that the alto sax part will need to be written in is going to be not D minor, but B minor. B minor. How many accidentals are in B minor's key signature? There are 2 sharps. So here, you're going to need to write F sharp and C sharp. It's okay that these 2 key signatures here don't match because they are transposing instruments and they transpose differently. So E minor for the B-flat clarinet, but B minor for the E-flat alto saxophone. The last thing we need to do is transpose all of these notes in the bass clef over here from the piano, transpose them up a major sixth. What are these notes sounding in the piano? Well, they are octave E's. E, 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 E. What note is exactly a major sixth above an E? The answer is C sharp. Now, we already have C sharp in the key signature, so you won't need to add sharps onto the notes themselves when you write them in. However, a major sixth above this E is actually C sharp 4, and a major sixth above this E4 is actually going to be C sharp 5. So that is why I gave you a treble clef here, and you can actually write your octave C's so that most of them will lay on the staff. The C-sharp 4 technically won't be on the staff, but the C-sharp 5 will be. So, the final answer for section 4A of your test review should look like this. If you can see that from where you are. In fact, maybe I can even increase the size of that for you a little bit so you can see the answer. There we go. B-flat clarinet and E-flat alto saxophone. In order to keep this lecture, this test to review under an hour, what I'm going to do next for probably the last several sections here is just I'll verbally go through the answers to this one, and then I'll probably just show you the part writing answers and whatever other answers that you need on the screen for the remaining sections. Okay? So, using the chords in context here, what we're supposed to do is fill in the blanks to create appropriate progressions for the given chords. But first determine whether the chords are in a major or a minor key. Alright. Minor 5, you know you have to be in a minor key. The progression that includes the minor 5 in first inversion is 1, minor 1, 5, 6, minor 4, and capital 5. Again, minor 1, minor 5, 6, minor 4, 6, and capital 5. The next one, the 3 chord, is minor, so you know that we must be in a major key. The progression with the 3 chord in a major key is 1, 3, 4, 5. Again, you could use 2, 6, or you could use a lowercase Roman numeral 6 here if you wanted to. I just find it easier to remember that after the 1 chord, it just goes 3, 4, 5. The next example, passing 6, 4, we can't really tell for certain whether we're in a major or a minor key because we just have the P for passing 6, 4. So it looks like we should be able to mark the both, or circle the both answer here. We could be either in a major key or a minor key. And a good set of chords to use for this progression, you could use 1, P6, 4, 1, 6. You could use the reverse. You could use 4.